On the very edge of a town, where the last houses gave way to the wilder embrace of nature, lay a small cemetery. It wasn't a place that whispered of ghouls or midnight terrors. No, this was a sanctuary, ringed by a silent congregation of tall, ancient trees. Their leaves, a vibrant tapestry of greens, rustled in the warm evening breeze, a sound like the softest sigh, a perpetual, gentle lament. This was a place of quiet sorrow, yes, but also a repository of precious memory, where the echoes of laughter and love lingered in the air, almost tangible. In the far corner, nestled beneath protective boughs of a weeping willow, stood two modest gravestones, their granite cool to the touch. And here, more often than not, a small boy would come to lie down. His purpose was not to weep, though tears had long since carved their paths down his young cheeks. Nor was it solely to mourn, for mourning was a constant companion, a shadow that clung to him. He came to be near, to feel the faintest vibration of the voices he could no longer hear, the voices that lived now only in the fragile chambers of his heart. His name was Emil. He was just 9 years old, yet his eyes held a weariness that bespoke a lifetime of sorrow, a profound understanding of loss that no child should ever possess. The gravestones, stark and simple, bore the names Elena Emilovna, a gentle mother, and beside it Daniel Emilov, a brave father. A car crash, sudden and brutal, had stolen from him almost a year ago. The world, in that instant, had tilted on its axis, and Emil had been left spinning in the void. He had no siblings to share the crushing weight of this absence, no grandparents to offer the solace of wrinkled hands and knowing smiles. The relatives that remained, distant cousins and aunts he barely knew, had offered fleeting condolences, their discomfort palpable, before retreating back into the normalcy of their own lives, leaving Emil adrift. And so, he found himself in the sterile embrace of the orphanage at the town's other edge. A clean bed, regular meals, the hollow chatter of other children. It was a life, but his heart, his truest self, remained tethered to that quiet corner of the cemetery where his parents rested. Each time a memory surfaced, a sudden, vivid flash of his mother's face as she sang a lullaby, her voice of velvet ribbon wrapping him in warmth. The deep, rumbling sound of his father's laugh, a sound that could make the whole world feel safe and bright. The pull became irresistible. He'd slip away, a small ghost haunting the periphery of adult supervision. Sometimes it was in the bright glare of the afternoon, the sun casting long shadows from the imposing orphanage gates. Other times, it was deep in the hush of night, when the moon was a silver sliver in the inky sky. Barefoot, his soles toughened by his frequent pilgrimages, or still clad in his creased school clothes, he would walk the long, familiar path. And there, between those two cold stones, he would curl his small body, the unyielding earth a poor, cold substitute for the warm, loving embraces he craved with an almost physical hunger. The stone soil, damp and cool, was the closest he could get to their embrace now. The townspeople, those who came to tend their own plots of grief, had seen him, of course. They'd passed by on their solemn visits, their eyes catching the still, small form lying there, looking almost as if he were a natural outgrowth of the ground itself, a sorrowful little mushroom. But something about his profound, solitary grief, the sheer depth of his despair, kept him at a distance. It wasn't cruelty, not exactly. It was a silent, hesitant respect, mixed with an uncomfortable fear. How does one approach such a wound? How do you offer comfort to someone whose grief is a chasm deeper than your own understanding, a language you no longer speak, or perhaps never knew? And so, they would avert their gazes, perhaps offer a silent prayer, and walk on, leaving him to his silent communion. Until one Thursday afternoon, the sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of apricot and rose. A woman named Mara, her late 40s etched onto her face in fine lines around her eyes, her dark hair streaked with distinguished silver, walked through the cemetery gates. There was a permanent silence in her gaze, a reflection of the sorrow she carried with her always. She came to visit her son's grave, a young man, vibrant and full of promise, taken by a swift, cruel illness just a year before, the same cruel turn of the calendar that had shattered Emil's world. She carried a small bouquet of freshly cut lilies, their white petals luminous in the fading light, their fragrance a sweet, poignant offering. as she always did. But that day, as she neared her son's resting place, she noticed Emil. He wasn't lying down this time. He was kneeling, his small back straight, his head bowed slightly between the two headstones. He was talking, his voice a low, earnest murmur, as though the stones themselves possessed ears, as though they were leaning in, listening intently. He wasn't crying. His voice was steady, conversational. He was telling them about his day at school, about the new boy, Thomas, who now shared his worn wooden desk and who had a gap-toothed smile. He spoke of a frustrating math problem, of a bird with brilliant blue feathers he'd seen outside the classroom window. He recounted a dream he'd had the night before, a wonderfully vivid dream where his father, his strong, capable father, had fixed his broken kite, its red tail streaming joyfully in an imaginary wind. And then, as if the telling had drained him, without warning he lay down, his small frame sinking into the familiar hollow between the stones, his cheek pressed against the cool earth. Mara watched from a short distance, her own carefully constructed composure beginning to crumble. Tears, unbidden, welled in her eyes, blurring the image of the small boy. Something in her heart, a deep, resonant chord of shared pain, pulled her forward, one slow step after another. The scent of her lilies mingled with the earthy aroma of the cemetery. "Hello," she said, her voice soft, barely more than a whisper, yet it seemed to break the profound stillness of the evening like a pebble dropped into a tranquil pond. Emil didn't move. He didn't flinch. Perhaps he thought it was a wind or a spirit of the place. "I lost someone too," Mara continued, her voice gaining a little strength, though it was still laced with a tremor of her own enduring grief. "My son, he used to talk to me in dreams. Sometimes, just like you talk to them now." Slowly, Emil turned his head. He looked up. His tired eyes, usually so guarded, were not filled with fear. Instead, they held a flicker of surprise, a spark of nascent curiosity. He sat up carefully, brushing dried leaves and bits of soil from his shirt with a practiced hand. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was filled with unspoken understanding, with the resonance of shared sorrow. The breeze whispered through the trees above them, a gentle accompaniment to their quiet contemplation. Do you want to sit with me next time?" Mara asked, the question simple, yet freighted with profound offering of companionship. Emil looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time. He saw the kindness in her eyes, the lines of sorrow that mirrored his own. He nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement, but it was enough. From that day forward, Emil's solitary vigils ended. He came no longer alone. Each week, sometimes more often, he and Mara would meet at the cemetery gates, sometimes by arrangement, sometimes by a shared, unspoken rhythm. They would walk together, their footsteps falling into a comfortable synchronicity on the gravel paths. She would tend her son's grave, arranging her flowers, whispering her updates, her love, her unending ache. And Emil, a few paces away, would do the same for his parents, his voice a soft murmur against the ancient stones. They didn't speak much to each other during these shared rituals. It wasn't necessary. The silence between them was full, a comforting blanket woven from threads of mutual understanding and respect. It was a silence that acknowledged the enormity of their losses without needing to articulate it, a silence that allowed their grief to simply be, without judgment, without the pressure to perform sorrow or to feign recovery. Emil stopped sleeping between the graves. The hard, cold earth no longer seemed the only comfort. He would still visit, of course. He would still place wildflowers he'd picked on the way, their bright colors a small defiance against the gray stone. He would still whisper his news, his hopes, his lingering sadness. But now, he always left before the sun dipped completely below the horizon, walking beside Mara, their shadows stretching long before them as they made their way back toward the town, toward the warmth of human connection, however fragile. One night, long after the last light had faded from a small window at the orphanage, long after he had drifted into the uneasy sleep of the lonely, Emil had a dream. It was intensely vivid, more real than any dream he'd had before. His parents stood beneath the familiar canopy of the trees that shaded their graves. They looked young, impossibly beautiful, their faces serene and peaceful, untouched by pain or worry. The light around them was soft, ethereal. "We are with you, my darling," his mother said, her voice as gentle and soothing as he remembered, her hand reaching out, her touch on his cheek as real as a summer breeze. "We never left, son," his father added, his voice warm and reassuring, "a pillar of strength even in this dreamscape. And we are so proud of you, proud of the brave boy you are becoming." Then his mother looked past him, over his shoulder, and a soft, knowing smile touched her lips. "She has a kind heart, Emil, a very kind heart." When Emil woke the next morning, the dream clung to him, a warm, comforting cloak. Sunlight streamed through his window, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, it didn't seem to mock his sadness. He felt a lightness, a sense of peace he hadn't known since before the accident. Without a thought for breakfast, for the orphanage routine, he scrambled out of bed, pulled on his clothes, and ran. He ran all the way to the cemetery, his small legs pumping, his heart light. Mara was already there, standing quietly before her son's grave, a single red rose in her hand. She turned as she heard his approaching footsteps, a gentle smile of welcome on her face. Emil didn't hesitate. He ran straight to her and hugged her tightly, burying his face in her side, his arms wrapped around her waist. He said nothing. No words were needed. The story of his dream, the comfort it brought, the message of love and acceptance, it was all there in the fierce, sudden embrace. And Mara, with the intuition born of her own deep sorrow and burgeoning affection, understood. She held him close, her hand stroking his hair, her own eyes glistening. From that day forward, they weren't just two grieving souls finding solace in a shared space. They were more. They were a family, pieced together not by the bonds of blood, but by the profound, shared experiences of loss, the quiet blossoming of love, and the undeniable, transformative healing power of human connection. In the quiet sorrow of the cemetery, amidst the whispering trees and silent stones,